in the country are taking their toll on businesses, and as manufacturers and service providers complain of intermittent cuts, a lower than expected growth rate for the country this year looks likely.
This week, several sets of data confirm that business activity is being hit hard by power supply shortages. Data shows manufacturing output in April contracted 2% compared with a year earlier. This as manufacturers complain of intermittent power disruptions leading to stop-start procedures on the factory floor. A confidence index by the Bureau of Economic Research also showed this week that the power cuts were among a few factors that pulled business sentiment down in the second quarter. The index slipped by 6 points.
I think there's no question that if you look at GDP growth for the full year 2015, whereas before we started having load shedding, we actually expected a bit of a bounce back after last year's very weak growth numbers. What the impact of electricity is now likely to be that growth recovery from last year is very little.
Add to that the latest growth forecast by Fitch Ratings Agency, and the situation looks bleak. Fitch reiterated this week that it cut its growth forecast for South Africa this year to 2.1% because of ongoing electricity supply constraints. Little promise for a country hoping to ease its unemployment rate of 26%. Devin Murrigan, SABC News, Johannesburg.
Well, access to electricity connections for small and medium-sized businesses came up in a report released by the World Bank today. The Doing Business in South Africa report compares regulations that impact businesses in major South African metros and ports. The dimensions measured include regulations relating to starting a business, obtaining construction permits, registering property and trading across borders. The difference across metros is sometimes stark. For instance, it takes 24 days to register property in Buffalo City, 52 days in Mangaung in the Free State. So that's more than double. Let's discuss. We're now joined by private sector development specialist Trimor Mici from World Bank Group. Thank you for joining us, Trimor.
Thank you for having me.
So I was trying to find out which metro, which city was the best and which was the worst, but that's hard to gauge because it looks like cities perform very differently in all the different areas. So you've avoided a rank basically from best to worst.
It's not that we have avoided the rank, but that's actually the reality. We have well-ranked cities and low-ranked cities in all areas. The major finding of the report is that no city outperforms all the others in all areas. And also there is no relationship between the size of the city and the ranking. So for instance, you have Cape Town and Johannesburg leading the dealing with construction permits and registering property indicators, but then you also have Mangaung leading in enforcing contracts and getting electricity. So
we can't say if you want to start a business and get it going and have good growth, you should be in one city rather than another. No indication of that.
Definitely not, because the report is not a full reflection of the investment climate in all cities. What is important about the report is that it looks at measures that are within government control. So these are things that government can eventually change, and that's the objective of the report. It's to first create a baseline that would look at what the situation looks like with these government services.
Well, that's interesting. Let me stop you, because you talk about getting electricity, but you mean a small business that needs an electricity connection. You're not looking at ongoing power supply, at load shedding and things like that.
No. The report just looked at getting a commercial electricity connection for a small or medium-sized enterprise. And sometimes that can put such enterprise in a make it or break it situation.
Okay, so there's such discrepancies on getting electricity. Mangaung in the Free State doing well, Nelson Mandela Bay really down there. Different things. It takes 24 days to register property, and in Buffalo, 52 in Mangaung. So these differences, but at least it shows cities other peers that they can learn from. Is that the idea as well?
Yes, that is the idea, and precisely having cities have uneven rankings across indicators means that all cities have something to learn and something to teach. So the idea is that hopefully cities will identify where the bottlenecks are and opportunities for improvements are, and then also identify what are the best practices within a country that they could adopt.
I in America, which you know well, I think cities, areas, they compete, they show themselves off. I think we're a bit reluctant to do that here. Do you think competition is good? These rankings are good. Maybe our cities will start vying a little bit.
Well, healthy competition is always good. The rankings are meant to be just a starting point. Where the work starts is looking at the details, looking at where are the bottlenecks, who are the agencies in charge, and what can be done to improve the processes.
Okay, so this benchmarks cities against others in South Africa. You also compare to global cities. Can you tell me generally how South Africa is doing?
So there are areas where South Africa does well, and there are others where it lags behind. For example, South Africa does very well in investor protection, ranked 17 globally, but then it lags behind, for example, in trading across borders or in registering property. And having said that, there is quite an interesting finding within the report in the Getting Electricity indicator, where the variation in the global rank, if you were to plug in some of the South African cities, you would see that Nelson Mandela would fall at the bottom 25 economies globally. But then you have Mangaung scoring above the OECD high income average. This means that there's huge variation, and it means that the lower ranked cities can actually improve, not relative just to their domestic peers, but also in the international stage.
Because I understand when you gauge us internationally, you can only take one city. So you always look at Joburg as the litmus test for South Africa. But now you're starting to see the nuances and these areas where we're really poor and these areas of excellence. Because I was encouraged by that. We do seem to have some areas where cities are excellent.
Correct, and in the global report, South Africa and all the other countries are typically represented by their largest business center, and so countries that want to go beyond their largest business center and see what the business climate in these areas look like in other areas request the so-called subnational doing business studies.
What is your overall impression? Because in South Africa, small businesses have been complaining for a long time. A lot of research suggesting that they keep on coming up against obstacles. There's unnecessary red tape. This is a huge call to government. Cut the red tape. Make it easier to do business. On the other hand, government says we're open and anybody can do business here. What is your sense, having looked at all these indicators across cities?
Well, I think the first step for all the cities is to digest the report results, see where there are good practices, especially within South Africa, and then try to adopt those. For instance, in the registering property area, issuing rates clearances is one of the main drivers of variation across cities. And then you have a group of cities that issue it electronically, and then you have the others that issue it manually. And you can see that on average, the cities that use electronic platforms to issue the rates clearances perform faster.
So deal with the variances first, and then we go from there. Okay, good diplomatic answer. Unfortunately, we have to stop it there. Trimor Mici from the World